what I would like to ask you about is, you've given, I think, a really excellent and clear presentation of the hypotheses. Well, I think it's remarkable. I've never seen such a clear presentation of these various views. But what I'd like to ask about is how this relates to philosophy of mathematics. Now, sorry, how this relates to the philosophy of mathematics. Oh, there's one. What I want to ask about is how this relates to the philosophy of mathematics. Now, this was something that interested me, and the problem was posed by Wigner, because Wigner made the famous assertion that mathematics is quite unreasonably effective in the natural sciences. Quite carefully worded there. And so philosophers of mathematics have tried to explain why is mathematics so effective, well, particularly in physics. Now, the thought I had is that you might be able to try and explain this by looking at a case where mathematics doesn't work. And then you can compare a case where it works and one where it doesn't work, and see if you can see the difference. Now, I thought that economics would be a good case where mathematics doesn't work. This was partly because I was I was mixing at the time with a group called the Post-Keynesians, and actually Keynes himself, what they did, they studied a lot of Keynes' thought, and they did show, although Keynes is his theory is often expounded in a mathematical form, Keynes himself was against the use of mathematics in economics. And one of the Post-Keynesians, some of you may know, Anna Caravelli, somewhere in the north of Italy, here possibly. Anyway, she did a study of Keynes, the early Keynes, who wrote a treatise on probability. And one of the things about that treatise is already at that stage he criticizes the fact that probability can be fully mathematized. And she shows that he's reacting against Russell. Cambridge was dominated by Russell at the time, and he puts forward this anti-mathematical point of view as regards probability, then as regards economics. And then the other example that impressed me was Soros, because Soros's work is qualitative. I'll just tell you a little anecdote about that, because I did once meet Soros, the great man, who told me about the reason is that he was a student of Popper's, which I was as well, so that it wasn't our bank balances, it was our intellectual backgrounds of the same. But Soros said to me, he made a remark which was both modest and immodest. He said that when he was studying, he was good at every single subject except mathematics. So therefore, he approached the problem non-mathematical. So it therefore seemed to me that this is very easy. The successful people in economics don't use mathematics, and so you now look for the difference between mathematics and physics and see how they differ. And this explains why mathematics is useful in physics but not in economics. The only problem is I'd ignored certain other people this man Keane, who you mentioned.
You mentioned him.
Yes, I found out about him later, and actually met him as well. He used mathematical models to correctly predict the big crash in 2007, or 2008, no,
Yeah.
2008. And he's part of this Raffian group. The Raffians always like using mathematics, and actually did so quite successfully. So this rather sort of produced a counterexample to the approach I was trying to adopt, which was a rather simple one. Maths works in physics, it doesn't work in economics. So the question I've got now for you as the rising generation, can you, now that we take account, and now this guy Sonnet, he's also managed to make some successful applications and predictions. So how, in the light of, if we take the overall picture, and there are some successful predictions and things using mathematics and economics, but it doesn't seem that the use of mathematics and economics is quite the same as in physics. So So how do you see all this relating to Wigner's claim? That's my question. Sorry, it's a rather difficult question. So I will.
Think you don't. Well, my answer is that maybe we can be effective and successful in the application of mathematics if you don't rely on the mathematics itself. I mean, you have to start from the verbal description of the synchronization, and you have, in some sense, to verbalize the entities, the relationship, the relations between the entities, and try to conceptualize in a verbal reason, a verbal model this question. And then maybe you can apply some new mathematics, if possible. I think it's the subject. So what I see is, well, I have this mathematics working in other fields, and the first thing I can do is try to impose this model on new situations, phenomena, economics, and finance. And it's very unlikely to be successful to me, because the model can be applied only if the features you are trying to model are the same as the model, or mathematical model. So if they are not, if you have a situation where you have a lot of domain-specific features, you cannot rely on linear mathematics. Probably you have to generate a verbal description, and then a qualitative model, and then maybe a new mathematics.
Emiliano, can you also use the mic?
Okay, yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. So, my answer to Wigner is there is no miracle.
It seems
As Carlo states, so no, there is no miracle at all in the successful application of part of the mathematics, small part of mathematics to physics. And because the mathematics we have now is the one developed for physics and not for social phenomena. Maybe I mean, Sonnet and Kim are using dynamic systems, so you can't physics. And
well, I have to say I found that quite possible. Yes, Emma.
yeah, Anna.
Yeah, I think that's in a sense relate to the discussion we had at the end
Yesterday.
But the employees are now see I see that also.
Why?
Why? And the point. But you know, from an epistemic point of view, all this discussion about the nature of prediction of stock prices neglect the main function of what the price of a stock should be.
Yeah.
Which is not the information about the news or information about the supply and demand in the short term, to be the value of the enterprise.
In the long run.
In the long or even in the short, but in the
This is how
problem,
it should be.
it should be.
It should be.
It should be.
Yes.
It should.
So,
How
in
it
a
is.
sense, this discussion, it's nice to criticize the classic model by saying that the behavior is more random, it is endogenous, it is more the approaches of real estate. But all this discussion is in a sense on the peripheral
the behavior of investors.
Yeah, the pure financial speculative behavior, and it's nothing to do with the
Real economics,
well, with the epistemic function.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't want to use the real economy. I mean, it's with the epistemic function of prices, which is to represent the Hayekian function. So to represent the value of the objects. And you might remember that the value of the Eni stocks were inferior a couple of years ago to the value of the paintings on the wall of their real estate. Okay, this is a completely irrational function. So I come to the problem of why we should invest so much in predicting this peripheral and pretty irrational behavior, which paradoxically, the last model is interesting. Okay, if you have mimicry behavior, contagion, bandwagon effect, the behavior is more predictable.
Yeah.
But it is predictable and irrational. So it's predictable thanks to his irrationality. So why do we want to invest a lot in that prediction? Perhaps the reinforcing, because we have all these self-fulfilling prophecies. So
Yeah, that's the problem.
we are going to reinforce this behavior,
Yeah.
or we have paid some attention on how the stock market or anything else should work, or behavior investors should behave, and then try to predict how those markets might work. So that's the problem that we have.
Yeah.
I think in the
That's
discussion
the problem.
yesterday.
Yeah, the problem is that you can prevent some crises, for instance, some crashes, some bubbles, if you have some institution that behave in a certain way.
You say you can predict or prevent?
Prevent
Prevent.
or
Yeah.
mitigate
Yeah,
at
or
least.
mitigate.
But it depends on on the composition of the markets and the regulators of the markets. So maybe you can look at the behavior of the markets, and then you can decide what institution you have to create or change in order to make the market more stable. But I mean, so net model is based an interesting idea. I mean, the idea to incorporate in the model a psychological aspect,
Yeah, I think
which
it's,
is emergent.
now it's
That's
very
a-
popular to do so, but I see a lot danger in doing so.
Yeah, that's a danger. But the problem, as we were talking about this point yesterday, the problem is how to pass from the micro level to micro level in financial markets. How can we neglect all this, the complication of this process? So that's a way to do this.
We should not neglect, but there is a difference between psychological economics and reached by the biases and all this irrational behavior. Fine, we should take into account, but we should not do only that, because otherwise we are going to reinforce those behavior and design the institution for, we are going to design institution for crooks, assuming opportunists,
Yeah.
an institution for stupids, assuming
Yeah.
all this kind of behavior. So that's dangerous. That's
Yeah,
what I mean.
the problem is that you can't cut off the expectations from markets. That's the problem. So bubbles are going to happen, in a way or another, and crashes are going to happen because the constituents are humans, and humans are fears, panic, can panic. They are greed.
Yeah, but why? It's like we should take into account, but also provide tools for improving those behavior, rather than assuming them, because assuming them is reinforcing them.
Yeah,
Tom?
Yeah,
Thank you for the question.
two or three quick comments on actually the question originally raised by Donald. Well, first, there is an important, Irish mathematical economist who spent his career mostly at Stanford and also at the Santa Fe Institute, and that's Brian Arthur, who wrote a famous paper called the El-Faro bar problem. In Santa Fe, there's this, it's actually a restaurant, and where people like to gather, but it often becomes too crowded. You can't find a seat. And so, rather than trying to have the information about what the actual state of the restaurant is, which is usually not available if you're far away and have to travel or something, you try to guess. What are other people thinking in terms of will they go to the restaurant tonight or not? So it's that same kind of same with choosing your traffic route home. There's a whole bunch of problems like this that you're trying to make a decision on what you think other people will be doing on that particular day, and they're doing the very same thing. And so there's quite a bit of work on that, and Brian Arthur is one of the famous ones. Like Donald, I'm interested in the analogies or implications of this for, in my case, the dynamics of science, and several points of possible connection. This is speculative, but things happen in the development of the sciences that weren't predictable, expected on the old accounts, right? And so this strongly suggests there's a complex internal dynamic. I think sciences can be regarded as complex systems of the sort here. And the point you made about crises not necessarily being triggered by major events. But just because the market has reached a certain internal state, and so even it seems to me there are examples in the history of science where a relatively ordinary, normal research produces something that just sort of hits the tipping point and starts a crisis like this. So, and I wonder, back on the El-Faro bar problem, could we? Is there an argument for scientific irrealism, or non-realism implicit here in that? I mean, suppose you're writing grant applications, right? Do you write your application based on what you think the world is really like, or what you think the grants committee are going to like? And I mean, this can play in different directions, of course. But it seems to me scientists are well aware that they have to package their work in appropriate ways to get attention. I've talked to some very well-known scientists like Luther Stent and so forth who say, so-and-so got a lot of credit for a certain development that he made. But I did something similar, only I didn't package it well, and so my contribution was basically overlooked. So I suspect there's something of that crowdsourced behavior going on in the scientific communities as well. I mean, if we're going to start emphasizing scientific communities, as Kuhn already started to do in different avenues of social studies of science, and even more, even philosophers are beginning to do, retarded as we are. You got to expect there's going to be complex dynamics of that sort. I think developing.
Great science never comply with committees. So that's
and on the bottom up, the application of mathematics, a fascinating question. And I don't know what you meant to suggest this, but I mean, even from the bottom up to get-go these days with our computer algorithms and stuff, we can use these for pattern detection in big data to detect that it's not random, that there are various there's structure there, and then proceed to the second stage, trying to find the mechanisms that
Data mining, you mean? Data mining.
More than that.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a very fruitful area. I think I tend to think it's very.
Comment on whether you want to be advised to grant applications. That's interesting.
I'll be talking a bit more about
That's
that.
quite likely to me.
one more question from
Lorenzo.
Yes.
So this is a philosophical question. So we have seen that knowledge about the crisis of capitalism
Yeah.
is available. Because there are many models that all say capitalism is affected by crisis.
Yeah.
Also, you said, they say that this crisis can be avoided, maybe. Or are they constitutive
Yeah.
of capitalism? Because if we say that crises are constitutive of capitalism, this is Karl Marx. So we cannot have capitalism without the crisis. I personally think that crisis can be avoided. But we have seen that the market, the people that decide in the market, they do not pay any attention to the knowledge produced by the capital. Because this,
By the group? Knowledge produced by the group?
by the knowledge produced, the academic knowledge. Because if you say, okay, you are a capitalist, you are a financial capitalist, because there is also the problem of the other. Avoid that behavior, because that behavior, I'm not sure, but it is inclined to lead to a crisis. But they do not avoid this behavior because they are short-term oriented to profit, and the typical economical operator forgets that there are the crises in capitalism.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of paradox, because it is like, it would be better, to be a bit provocative, to analyze the life of the economy, because we live not to face with economical crisis, people, workers without job, and so on and so on. It would be better to analyze. I prefer the last, far from equilibrium picture, because it is like the one of the organisms, of the biological organisms,
Yeah, there is a
that have to die. Okay. It would be better to analyze the life of the modern capitalism following, for instance, the model used by René Girard. Do you know who is René Girard? The one that wrote the book, The Scapegoat. He says, there is not the wisdom of the crowd, there is the violence of the crowd. The crowd needs crisis, and crises are the equivalent of the sacrifice. After the sacrifice, we are all purified. And this is another picture, a bit provocative. But I am a follower of the Enlightenment. So I think that it is time in the economical life of capitalism to pay attention to the knowledge produced in the academy and not only in the university.
But it's not profitable.
And it's not profitable in the short term, because you make a profit and then you arrive to destroy the capital.
Life is short. To make profit within your lifetime.
Yeah, I mean,
The destruction of capitals were already known at the beginning of the capitalistic
it's
revolution.
during a crisis or a crash or a bubble that you became rich. It's when there is a crisis or a bubble or a crisis in financial market, for instance, that you are going to become rich, not during the normal status.
But it is
Well, the financial player.
extremely random.
Yeah,
But extremely profitable. So,
yeah. So, I mean,
if you
Soros is
If you have
an
Soros.
example.
yeah.
Well, but here you are opening
Yeah.
immense discussions.
Yeah.
Even this talk about, is that capitalism at all? Is the reason of profit? I mean, we should go perhaps back to Marshall and Smith and Weber about what was capitalism and how little the profit should play a role.
Yeah, I mean,
It's all-
I was more modest.
it's all
The point of my
messy.
talk was to show that the way you generate the hypothesis can explain why it works, why it works, why it doesn't work. So that's the main connection in my paper.
Well, I think at this point we must break for coffee.
Yeah, that's
We've got the whole problem of is capitalism about to collapse? Is Marx correct? And so on. But we could do that over coffee. Okay, thanks very much.
Actually, Tom, yes. Stay on this floor.
Sì. Me lo dai girando? No, ma no, io la sto facendo, io la sto. Sì.